Hey everyone, welcome back to the Collector's Compass, the official podcast of Collectors MD, where we explore the intersection of collecting, mental wellness, and responsible engagement across the modern hobby and beyond. I'm your host, Alyx Efron, founder of Collectors MD, and today's episode is a big one, and honestly, a long time coming. I'm joined by Matt Litt, a consumer protection attorney who has spent years working in and around predatory gambling practices, addiction recovery, and harm prevention. Matt's legal work has put him face to face with how casinos, sportsbooks, and betting platforms engineer urgency, chase behavior, and dopamine-driven engagement. More recently, Matt has started applying that same lens to sports cards and the hobby, and what he's seeing is unsettlingly familiar. This isn't an anti-hobby conversation. It's not about demonizing collectors, shops, or breakers. It's about recognizing when systems start to move faster than ethics and what happens to people when there are no guardrails. Matt has also appeared on the One Day at a Time Gambling Awareness podcast with our friend Rob Minnick, who many of you know joined us previously here on the Collector's Compass. So there's a shared ecosystem of experience, language, and concern that makes this conversation especially important. Matt, I really appreciate you being here, man. Thanks for joining.
Good afternoon, Alyx. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Before we dive in, do you want to just give our audience a little bit of background? I know I sort of set the table there for you, but if you want to just provide any additional context around your experience, what you do, and sort of what you've been seeing across both the gambling industry and the hobby as a whole.
Yeah, you covered it pretty well, so I don't have a ton to add, but I would say that what I do is I hold casinos accountable on behalf of addicted gamblers and their families when the casinos take an active role in the addiction of an individual, whether they start the addiction, whether they sustain it, or whether they grow it. That's when I get involved. So if all a casino did was kind of open up its doors, whether those doors are brick and mortar or digital, and allow a gambler to come in and that gambler, gambled too much, that's generally not something I get involved in. When I talk about predatory gambling, and I wouldn't be surprised if other people, including Rob, who I have an enormous amount of respect for, he might define predatory gambling differently. I think we all might define it a little bit differently. But I define it as the casino is taking an active role in the addiction through incentivization, manipulation, and encouragement. And like you mentioned, unfortunately, there is a lot of shared nomenclature and other things between predatory gambling and what I am seeing in the hobby, what I would call, predatory sales tactics in the hobby as well.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more of it every single day. Especially this time of year with these big releases. Topps Chrome Basketball just released last week, and it has been just, I don't think I've seen this much buzz around a product or a draft class or just the hobby since honestly early on in the pandemic when, Prism basketball with Zion and Ja Morant was just absolutely booming, and everybody was on lockdown and getting involved in breaks and online rips. And, the hobby just saw, a massive, boom in terms of the direction it was headed in. And I feel like we're seeing that all over again with the Fanatics takeover and everything that's been going on. So the timing of this conversation is great. It couldn't be coming at a better time. We had just talked about before we hopped on that we just officially rolled out our #RipResponsibly campaign in partnership with 1-800-GAMBLER, which I'm just so incredibly proud of and excited for. Just the fact that the gambling awareness and prevention industry is finally paying attention and seeing the overlap and the synergies between what folks are going through on both the gambling, traditional gambling and hobby side of things. There's just so much overlap and people are really hurting right now. And so we just want to make sure that we are providing a safe space for folks to come to, access to tools and resources, hotlines, professional guided therapy, one-on-ones with financial advisors, all of that, just so that they can sort of recalibrate, refocus, and make sure that they're still collecting, doing so with intention. And if they need to take a break and abstain, they're doing that too. So again, this is super timely, and just really glad to have you involved in the conversation. You and I connected about a month ago, and you've been involved in our community ever since. And so I'm just really glad that we are finally having this public conversation, so folks can tune in and hear everything that's been going on behind the scenes. So with that, we're going to start our first segment, which is From Casinos to Cards, Seeing the Pattern. So I want to start with a simple question. What was the moment you first realized the sports card industry was starting to mirror casino behavior?
Yeah, I think it was a sort of an evolution of things. It was, I was a collector, probably a generation before you started, but I'm used to collecting meaning something different. Back in the 80s, collecting meant something different. And, I've never truly left the hobby, so I always had my eyes on it. So I've always understood what breaking was and what was going on in the hobby. So I've been aware of it. I guess I've always been aware of it. I think my first clue was when I first started buying boxes to break with my kids. And I used to love the Allen and Ginter stuff. So I would buy a box, or maybe more than one box of Allen and Ginter. We'd sit around and break. And I realized that my kids just were discarding everything but what they considered to be a hit. So anything but a relic or an autograph, basically. Right. So I think that was kind of my first hint. I think the next one came when I was getting phone calls and emails from people, from potential clients, who were describing to me the suffering that they underwent through breaking and through ripping. And I realized from their stories that their stories are almost a precise parallel to the casino industry. And from there, I started getting a little deeper. There was the Bedard bounty, that David Adams had a year or so ago, which right. to me was, when you have the same company who's selling the cards also offering a bounty, if $1 million bounty, if you pull a 1 of 1, to me, that was textbook gambling. That's a textbook illegal lottery. So that got me a little bit deeper into it. But like you said, now that Fanatics and ESPN and eBay have all become so involved with this, I've seen just more and more, marketing attempts at marketing that mirror what I'm seeing in casinos, and that are really, really troubling to me.
Yeah, it's crazy how much sports card products in general have just become, these glorified scratch offs. You mentioned the Bedard bounty. We're seeing more and more of these bounties, 6-figure bounties, pop up from major, hobby shops and breakers. The LeBron Superfractor 1 of 1 auto that literally was just hit a couple days ago had a $500,000 bounty on it. That's absolute madness, right? And, over time, many sports card products have just shifted away from traditional collecting and towards this chance-based entertainment that closely resembles casino mechanics. And, these modern products are just increasingly structured around the randomized outcomes and the high-value jackpots and engineered anticipation rather than set value or completion, right, the way it used to be. Instead of buying a product like Allen and Ginter, which is a great example because that's a product that's fun to rip. You could rip it with your kids, with your friends, your family, and just really have a good time with it, as opposed to just chasing, monetary value. But, instead of just buying a product like that for what's inside, collectors are now often buying for what might be inside, right? That dynamic is functionally similar to a scratch-off ticket. Most outcomes are losses. a small percentage are break even, and a tiny fraction deliver outsized wins that are heavily promoted. And that's what we see in our news feeds and our social media feeds. The experience itself mirrors casino design. The reveal is fast and emotionally charged. The near miss matters just as much, if not more, than the hit, right? Misses are reframed as, oh, you were so close, encouraging, people, customers to keep purchasing. And high-end hits are amplified across, again, social media, while losses are just completely invisible, which creates this illusion that winning is just more common than it really is. So, products like the mystery repacks, the bounty-based incentives we were just talking about, the high dollar breaks, all of it just intensifies this effect. And they introduce escalating rewards, time pressure, and social proof, all of which are just well-documented tools used in the gambling environment to keep participants engaged in chasing. None of this means collecting in itself is per se bad or wrong. We always preface that. But when products are designed primarily around the dopamine rush rather than enjoyment of the specific item, that's when the hobby starts to operate like a casino, without the disclosures, the age gates, the guardrails, that traditional gambling environments are at least required to acknowledge. So that's why Collectors MD talks about, awareness, not prohibition. The goal isn't to shut the hobby down. It's to help people recognize when collecting stops being about appreciation and starts functioning like a game of chance, so they can make informed, intentional choices before harm sets in. And this is exactly why we partnered with 800-Gambler, right? You see those 1-800-Gambler disclaimers on every single casino and sportsbook commercial. The reason is it's their corporate responsibility of, like, the DraftKings, the FanDuels, the MGMs, the Caesars, to place that messaging so that the customers of theirs that need support, need help, need guidance, have a place to go. It's also legally required, but the fact that we're not seeing that across the hobby is very telling. And it's, gotten to a point where it's just spiraled out of control. And so we're changing that. Obviously, this campaign that launched today is a game changer. And we already have a handful of card shops and break groups, big ones, that are getting behind this message and are going to start layering in our responsible ripping messaging and badging in the coming weeks, which again, we're really proud of.
Sure, and you should be proud of it. I think you've made an incredible amount of progress in this space in a relatively short amount of time, and I think the work you're doing is so important. And that partnership with the Council on Compulsive Gambling really is amazing. And a huge credit to you and to them as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Matt. I want to unpack this whole idea of, like, the bounties and the mystery products and the high dollar breaks, the countdown auctions. All of that is framed as excitement, opportunity, and upside. So from where you sit from a legal and behavioral standpoint, like, how similar is that to what casinos have been doing for decades?
I think it's almost identical. I mean, I think it fits the legal definition of gambling in almost every state. I mean, you're risking money in an effort to win more money on a game that you have no ability to influence. Right. It is to me, it's textbook gambling, but it's wearing different clothing that so far the legislature hasn't taken action on. But I don't see any difference between what you're describing in a break or with a rip and spin of the roulette wheel or a game of blackjack. As far as I'm concerned, it's the same thing.
Right. Yeah, and one line that keeps coming up for us is different industry, same psychological machinery, right? So when a pack stops being a collectible and starts functioning like a wager, is that distinction meaningful legally or only culturally right now?
So I believe it's meaningful legally. So to me, where you cross the line, not you, I should say, where the line is being crossed is when you're talking about a binary outcome. So you were talking a minute ago about opening a pack or being in a break, and you're talking about winning or losing or hitting or missing. When what you're doing can be described as a win or a loss or a hit or a miss, to me, that's where you've crossed the line between collecting and gambling. And I don't want to relate everything back to 1987 Topps baseball, but that's my understanding of the hobby. That's where I grew up. So back then, there was an element of this. There always has been in card collecting. So when I bought a wax pack, I was hoping to get Jose Canseco Topps All-Star Rookie or a Bo Jackson Future Star. And if I didn't, there was a disappointment. But the pack wasn't a bust. I would never describe a pack that did not include those cards as a loss or a miss. I think that's the difference, is when there's a focus on one or a small number of cards, and you can describe the experience as a win or a loss or a hit or a miss. When there's a binary outcome, to me, that's where the lines cross, and that's where we're talking about gambling instead of collecting.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's transition over to our next segment, which is predatory incentives and real-time harm. So I want to zoom in a bit on the actual mechanics. In gambling, we hear terms like VIP hosts and deposit matches and time-limited bonuses. Why is urgency such a dangerous tool?
Because it plays on impulsivity, which a gambling addict or an addict of any kind struggles with. I mean, that's a hallmark of an addiction, is an inability to control your impulses. So by creating this faux urgency, you're acting on that impulse control or lack thereof, and basically manipulating the gambler or the customer to do what you want them to do, even though it's clearly, in many cases, against their own best interest.
Yeah. And, this is where I think people get a little bit confused, right? We see responsible gambling messaging everywhere, but often only after the harm occurs, right? So is that because legally responsibility tends to shift after the damage is done?
That's a big part of it. So I think you hit on two important things there. Number one, that their whole responsible gaming model is bullshit. I mean, it puts everything on the gambler without any acknowledgement that it's a potentially harmful and addictive product. That's number one. The second part of it is that yes, these things only come into play after the harm has been done. So there's these mechanisms in place, like 1-800-GAMBLER, for people who have fallen into the water, for people who are drowning and need help, but no one's putting up a fence to prevent them from falling in the water to begin with. And that's what's missing in the casino industry, and I'm sure it's the same thing in the collecting industry. No one is there to help someone who's made a little bit of a mistake. These resources are there for people who have had absolutely catastrophic outcomes, try to put the pieces back together, but there's nothing there for someone who's made a small mistake and wants to avoid that catastrophe.
Right. So the idea is layering in this awareness early enough on where folks understand the risk, the associated risk, the nuances, the potential for these catastrophic instances to take place. And so by doing that, they can then protect themselves, set those internal guardrails, create those boundaries, whether it be tangible or intangible, so that if or when the opportunity presents itself for them to completely spiral, they now have, a protection plan in place. And that's really, really important. What we don't want to see, and this is what we see most of, but we'd like to scale this back if possible as a whole, is people just completely hitting a wall, hitting rock bottom, ending up in these financial holes, looking at things like, divorce, losing custody of their children, having to sell their homes, their cars, their personal belongings, all because they got themselves into this position through, the exploitative and predatory nature that is the modern day gambling environment. And so, with everything that we're doing in the hobby, the goal from the onset was to create a one-stop shop ecosystem for people to come, learn, become acclimated with this community, and figure out where they are, in terms of their collecting journey. That's why we offer two distinct paths, one for intentional collecting and another for abstinence. We have a large amount of people, as you know, that want to continue engaging in the hobby, but want to do so in a thoughtful, mindful, intentional and responsible way, because they know they're aware of the fact that things can spiral very, very quickly. Things can turn ugly really, really quickly. And then on the other side of the coin, of course, abstinence, folks that just can no longer have a healthy relationship with collecting and need to abstain completely. And so we respect both of those lanes equally. We meet folks wherever they are in their collecting and recovery journeys. But again, we want to make sure that, we're starting to see less and less people coming to us having had hit rock bottom. I know that's going to be inevitable, but ideally, by spreading this message, spreading awareness, collectively as a whole, we can make the hobby a safer, healthier, and more sustainable place for the foreseeable future. So with that, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Alyx, but I think there's another really important component of what you're doing at Collectors MD that you didn't mention, which is the destigmatization of this idea of addiction. And I think that you have created a safe space where people don't have to hit rock bottom before feeling welcome in your community. And I think that's something I wish that existed in the casino industry. I don't think it does. You've created that, and I think that's an incredible thing. But I think that's another really important piece to this, is that you don't have to acknowledge, or you don't have to believe that you've hit rock bottom and you're an addict in order to utilize the resources of Collectors MD. And I think that's such an important thing that you're doing. And I hope that continues. And I know it will.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an analogy that I like to use, and that's the bartender comparison, right? The bartender analogy is about when responsibility shifts from the individual to the actual system, right? A person chooses to drink, but once a bartender sees clear signs of intoxication, continuing to serve becomes the bartender's responsibility, not just the customer's choice. So, using this as sort of a parallel to explain how modern collecting and gambling-like environments create the same sort of experience for the customer. When systems are designed to escalate spending and push urgency and profit from repeated behavior, especially when risk is completely obvious, completely visible, responsibility becomes systemic. It's not about removing personal agency. It's about recognizing that profiting from foreseeable harm creates ethical responsibility, right? So at what point does responsibility stop being personal and start becoming systemic?
Yeah. So, I mean, what you just described, dram shop law, where the person serving a visibly intoxicated individual is responsible for the outcome of that. I mean, that's my dream for the gambling world. And it's so simple. I mean, the paradigm is already there, but of course, that's not what legislators want. That's certainly not what the casinos want. In my opinion, in every case, it's different. So, I use the same analogy you do, but I say it a little bit differently, which is if you're served 20 beers and then you go out and you cause harm, without question, I think we could agree that the first 5 beers are on you. I think without question, everyone could agree that the last 5 beers are on the bar. They should have seen and they should have known. Those 10 beers in the middle is where there's a gray area, and we can kind of have a debate. And that's what I think the courts should be listening to. Right now, under the law, all 20 beers are on you and you alone, which is completely illogical. It's completely inconsistent with what you're talking about, dram shop under alcohol. But for whatever, I shouldn't say whatever reason, like I don't know, it's money. That's the reason. Casinos are held to a different standard than alcohol, tobacco, or pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think about like when you see, I don't know, a celebrity overdose, like I'm thinking of Mac Miller, right? And they do a full-on investigation to find out, where the drugs came from, how he ended up in the position he was in, and then there's legal ramifications for those providing the drugs. Obviously, it's a different animal we're talking about because we're talking about an illegal substance versus a legal substance. But it's interesting to me that, when somebody dies from a drug overdose, they, go all the way back to the source in terms of, all right, where did the drugs come from? How do we, arrest that person? How do we go above to the bigger fish and potentially, obviously every case, every situation is different and unique in its own right. But generally speaking, the end goal, I think a lot of times is to sort of, stop the leakage, right? So find like where the main source of that leak is coming from and, completely prevent them from continuing their operation. Whereas with, alcohol, somebody overdoses from alcohol poisoning, they're not going back to the bar and asking that bartender specific questions per se, the same way they would when it comes to narcotics. So, aside from the fact that, these narcotics we're talking about are illegal, is there any particular reason why that isn't the case?
Yeah, money. Because if it was more difficult for people to gamble, the casinos will make less money, which means there's less revenue going to the states, and the people who are in a position to make the changes are all benefiting from addiction. Make no mistake about it. They are the ones benefiting from addiction. So they are not incentivized in any way to slow it down. I use the example. You talked earlier how you're not trying to bring down the hobby, and I feel the same way. The same way with gambling. I'll place a bet on a Sunday. I placed two $50 bets yesterday on an NFL Sunday. You've seen how much FanDuel and DraftKings and BetMGM and Caesars, how much they advertise and how much money they're spending on all the different things they're spending money on, whether it's sponsors or promotions and marketing and everything else. There is no number you can multiply my $100 bet by that would allow them to be profitable. If I'm betting $100 a week, let's say on the NFL, there's no number of me you can multiply in order to make them profitable. They need people who are losing unhealthy amounts of money, or else their business plan doesn't work. That's the problem. That's why, because there's too much money at stake.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people also don't account for the fact that while alcohol and drug use can lead to death via, overdose or, other complications, the fact that gambling and collecting and overspending, all these things we're talking about, it's not like you're putting a chemical inside of your body, but they can lead to major mental and emotional, fallout. And so subsequently, we're seeing a massive increase in suicide within these, harm or potentially harmful spaces. And so people need to realize that. People need to understand that that's a completely legitimate layer that, connects the dots in terms of everything we just discussed.
It's an incredibly high rate of suicide for gambling addiction. And, the other thing that I think a lot of people don't understand, the people who are not seeing this every day like you and I are, is that gambling addiction is classified by the American Psychiatric Association right alongside all of the other addictions you've mentioned, right alongside alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceuticals, and things like opioids and illegal drugs as well. Under the DSM-5, it's all categorized under the same heading. So it's not like an addiction, and it wasn't always that way. There was a time when addiction was classified alongside pyromania and kleptomania. It was treated as a joke. But those days are over. I mean, it's understood now by science. Science understands how addicting it can be, and it's just like all those other things. And the rate of suicide, makes it just as dangerous, if not more so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what really concerns me most is how fast all this is happening now. There's no pause. So would you agree that, the harm today isn't theoretical? It's happening in real time inside frictionless environments?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I have received, I would say, between 2 and 3 and 4 phone calls or emails a day from addicted gamblers or their families for years now. I mean, the harm is here. It's not necessarily as public as it will be, but 100% it is here. People's lives, families' lives are being ruined every single day because of gambling addiction, every day.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate, but it's the reality of the world we live in now. And so that's why awareness, education, accountability, all of those things are just so incredibly important, not just for the consumer who's engaging in the behavior, but for the family, the loved ones, even friends and colleagues of people who might be at risk, right? We have to make sure that as many people as we reach as many people as we possibly can, because there's always that, multiple degree of separation, right? Whether it be a friend of a friend, a cousin, most people know somebody who has experienced addiction in some capacity, right? So I want to shift over to our next segment, which is responsibility, accountability, and legal blind spots. So I want to talk about accountability first. Historically, casinos have been almost impossible to beat in court. Why is that?
So I think part of it is the immature science that I just mentioned, but the standard has been forever that, I think I referenced this earlier in a different context, the standard has always been a casino is not responsible for stopping a gambler from harming themselves. So back when we're talking about, brick and mortar days, and that's when the law was created. I mean, I'm fighting against, and when lawyers are going into court on these issues, we're fighting against brick and mortar law that has not been updated since, the 1990s. So the reason is that science understood gambling addiction to be kind of nonsense. And because of that, the courts refused to acknowledge that there was any responsibility on the part of anyone other than the gambler, him or herself. And the law is outdated and has not evolved to be consistent with the new science and to be consistent with the difference between a VIP host, giving you a call and offering you a free room in Atlantic City next weekend, and real-time text messages offering a 20% deposit bonus if you deposit $20,000 in the next 72 hours. The law is still based on prehistoric understanding of what casinos and VIP hosts are.
Right. So it sounds like some changes, some reform needs to happen on the legal side of things so that, things can be viewed, I guess in a more contemporary, modern way, right? Based on the evolution of a lot of these systems.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. I mean, there needs to be an acknowledgement and an update to account for real-time incentives, real-time incentives based on impulse, and how it seems so rudimentary to you and I, and I'm sure to anyone watching, to say, well, when gambling on your phone is different than making the decision to drive to Atlantic City. But the law does not recognize that distinction, which is crazy, and it's coming. I mean, it will come, but the question is, how many lives have to be compromised between now and then?
Yeah, that scares me, because if the traditional gambling industry is taking this long to catch up from a legal standpoint, how long is it going to take for the hobby, to catch up, right? Or for the legal side of things to catch up with the current state of the hobby. So when we look at what's happening in the hobby right now, with large, well-capitalized companies facing, legal disputes and class action lawsuits and things like that, how does that same imbalance of power play out? Like when one side has effectively unlimited money and time We're talking about these monopolies that people are calling it now, the fanatics and, collectors with PSA and them just, buying Beckett and things like that. How do consumers realistically push back, and what actually moves the needle?
It's people like you. I mean, honestly, it takes people like you speaking out and explaining these things to people who otherwise wouldn't be exposed to it and wouldn't understand it. I mean, that's what, and to be clear, the casino industry is nowhere near where it needs to be, but it has evolved in the few years since I've been involved. And what I've seen, what really moved that needle was taking these stories from the shadows and putting them out into the public, into the light, so that people who either were not involved or didn't understand were exposed to it and were as disgusted as they should be. And I think that's what it takes. It takes real people with real courage telling stories that are going to disgust people who don't otherwise engage with this.
Yeah, I've always said that Collectors MD isn't here to change the law, right? We advocate for reform where it's needed, but our primary focus is supporting the people who are really, hurting on the front lines right now. So we have a whole industry reform proposal. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of hidden in a way. I mean, we had promoted it a bit when we first created it, and I could show it to you real quick. But this might be something worth collaborating on in some capacity. Give me one sec to share my screen here. So this was last updated towards the end of September, but it's a proposal for regulating sports card and TCG breaking activities. And by the way, I know we've been primarily talking about sports cards. Obviously, there are other verticals, other activities that are at play here. TCG being trading card games like Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, etc., which have become increasingly popular globally. But it also extends into other categories and hobbies like sneaker collecting and memorabilia, watches, handbags, gaming, even NFTs, obviously comic books. I mean, the list spans. But this is basically focused on the hobby as a whole, the hobby being sports cards and TCG. And so we touch on the industry reform, building a healthier hobby. We get into all of the objectives around this, ensuring fairness and transparency, preventing fraud, standardized practices, consumer protection, responsibly breaking messaging, which is what our Rip Responsibly campaign is. And then it gets into the guardrails that we'd like to see, the licensing, registration, age gates, transparency in pricing, odds and formats, spending limits, self-exclusion and transaction history, responsible gaming warnings and support resources, verified randomization and record keeping, real-time receipts and break recording, platform accountability and moderation tools, ban on conflicts of interest and unlicensed gambling, education, awareness and community training, financial safeguards and encryption standards, refunds and dispute resolutions, and audit and compliance enforcement. And then we just outline, the benefits, the implementation plan, what this, would look like as we continue to see, more and more of this becoming prevalent, what an industry shift would look like. Then we get into our co-branded Rip Responsibly initiative, which has since rolled out, which again, I'm just really happy that we were able to take a lot of this and sort of bring it to light, bring it to fruition, make it, we took this and turned it into an actionable item in a lot of ways, but there's still a lot more to be done here. So, I'd love for you, Matt, to at some point, maybe in the new year, take a quick look at this, reform initiative. And again, like, it's outside of our jurisdiction to take action on a lot of these things, but what we'd like to do is spread awareness on this so that, local legislators and attorneys that are involved have a sense of framework that they can work off of.
Yeah, I'd be happy to work on this with you, because I think, the two things go hand in hand. Helping people, in some distress now has to go hand in hand with changes in the law, because that's what's going to prevent those same harms from happening in the future. So I think the two things do go hand in hand. And in my experience, so many of my clients who have been through hell with their gambling addiction, want to tell their story or, stand up to make a change so that it doesn't happen to someone else, next
Right.
year.
Right. Yeah, and when we look at the hobby, and we kind of touched on this already, but the no age gating, the no odds disclosures, the no spending friction, the no meaningful self-exclusion tools, are we essentially operating in a legal blind spot?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think you're exactly right. That's exactly what it is. I mean, the idea that there's no self-exclusion is, I mean, listen, I understand it from their perspective. They don't want to acknowledge that there's any need for an
Right.
exclusion. But I think the fact that there's no self-exclusion tells you everything you need to know. You have an addictive product here with no way out and no acknowledgement that anyone needs a way out. I mean, that to me tells you everything about it being a legal blind spot.
Yep. So again, it's all about educating the masses, not just the collectors, but folks at the helm, people that are on the hobby side in terms of being at a C-level position at a Fanatics or a whatnot or an eBay, and then of course folks like you, attorneys, legal representatives, state legislators, things like that, so that more and more people can become aware of what's going on here and continue to really go against the grain in terms of fighting this uphill battle. But just the more we push back and demand reform, the louder this conversation becomes, and the more urgency is sort of thrown in the direction of these big players in the hobby space to actually make some tangible changes. And we're already seeing it. I mean, there was a gentleman who created some sort of legal document that was sent to collectors, or it was sent to like a local government to basically assess and analyze this this acquisition that collectors made last week with adding Beckett to its portfolio of brands, which now includes PSA, SGC, and Beckett, which are the three biggest players, the three major grading services in the hobby. And basically determine if it is indeed a monopoly, and if so, legal action needs to take place. I think that's important, but it's not necessarily the number one priority in terms of the bigger picture. But it's good to see that folks are actually taking action on a lot of this stuff. I mean, there are class action lawsuits that are out there that you're aware of across the hobby. I don't have any updates or know the status of any of them, but hopefully that helps move the needle a little bit in court, and we start seeing some action items come out of that. But again, we need to get the word out there. We need to let people know what's going on behind the scenes.
That's the only way. Yeah, I mean, that's the only way that things are going to change, is by letting people know. And I'll tell you, I thought for sure that the Bedard bounty was going to be the thing to change it. It was a big round number. It was a shocking number. I still believe, honestly, that bringing that practice to light, the fact that a company who's selling opportunities to pull a card is also offering $1 million for that card, I think that's a case that could really start to shift things.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to find anyone who bought into it. But that doesn't mean that that's going to stay that way forever. But I still think that could be a really groundbreaking case.
Yeah. The whole bounty, situation where these major card shops and companies like David Adams are putting bounties on specific cards in these products. The reason they do it in the first place is to lure people in to rip, right? They want to sell the product. So, in anticipation of that, they create these urgency games, where these tactics where they say, all right, well, if the biggest card gets hit, we're going to, pay you a lottery ticket. And so more people are going to go out and just start buying up the product.
Yep.
So, even Topps even did this. They did this buyback thing a couple of years ago with Bowman. It was Bowman Chrome. And it was supposedly or allegedly because they accidentally printed multiple superfractors of pretty much all of the prospects in the set. And so there were like 2 superfractors in circulation for every single prospect, which defeats the purpose of a 1-of-1 superfractor, right?
Sure.
So they did this whole program where if you hit one of the superfractors and send it in, they would pay you out the associated comp or value, which actually was much higher for the most part than what these prospects would have actually sold for on the aftermarket. And so the idea was they would receive, one of the copies of the superfractor for any given player, and they would destroy it. And then they would take that name off the list. So if the second one is hit, they'd go on to see if, it's available for trade-in. They now know the first copy was destroyed. I don't know if that makes sense, but they did this whole thing, and it was this like this program, and people were chasing after these superfractors so they could sell them back to Topps and make top dollar. Like, the question is, like, was that a legitimate thing they created, or was it like a kind of engineered marketing play where they purposely created 2 superfractors so that they could drive more buzz, more attention around this particular product? I'm not making any accusations or saying that's the case, but it definitely opens the door for speculation. And I think a lot of people asked those questions when this happened. Again, this was like 2-3 years ago, so it's been some time. And I believe this was before Fanatics officially bought Topps. It may not have been, but just the fact that like something like that even exists in the first place, just again, is very telling of where we're at as a hobby.
And I'll tell you, I'll take it one step further. I don't know that I care whether they did it intentionally or not. The effect is the same, which is that's a lottery ticket. Every pack now becomes a lottery ticket, and obviously they're not licensed to run a lottery, which means they shouldn't be doing what they're doing.
I actually found the page. It's still here, so I'm just going to pull it up real quick.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to see that.
I couldn't agree more. I'm surprised that the page still exists. Let's see here. Bowman buyback. Let's take a moment to show this. Okay, so this landing page says, for those listening on our audio platforms, Bowman Chrome buyback. Okay, so the buyback closed. The Bowman Chrome buyback program has ended effective March 31st, 2024, and we are not accepting any new submissions. Thank you to all our collectors who participated in the buyback. Buyback trackers, see below for the full list of 2023 Bowman Chrome Superfractor cards that were eligible for the buyback program. And here you go. I mean, all of this is right here. It's crazy that this is still public, but you could see that they bought back all of these 1-of-1s already. But like a lot of these guys are no names. I mean, no, and that's no offense to any of them or any fans of these players, but like the whole point of Bowman is prospecting, and unfortunately, the majority of these prospects don't pan out in the long run. So I personally haven't heard any of these names come up since the product release, but we're talking about like Juan Benjamin, the buyback value, $5,000. Oswaldo Azorio, buyback value, $10,000, right? Like Luis Torres, Daverson Gutierrez.
So out of curiosity, what would a pack have cost at that time?
The box of this product was like maybe $800 for like the HTA for like, you get like 3 autos and that's it. And then I think the hobby format was maybe like $300-$400. I don't know if it was that expensive, but that's just off pure memory.
Yeah.
I mean, Felton Celestin, who's still considered a top prospect for the Mariners, his buyback value was $35,000. Like, I think if his 1-of-1 super was hit today and sold, it probably wouldn't fetch nearly that much. I mean, there were a few that actually weren't purchased here.
Yeah,
but there was one particular player, I think it was Ethan Salas. Yeah, so his was $75,000. And granted, these are all the non-autos. The autos sell for way more, but still, just the fact that like Topps themselves put basically bounties on each of these cards. I mean, as a Yankee fan, I could tell you that Brandon Maea isn't panning out. He's not going to ever be a big leaguer, but his buyback value was $25,000.
I would love to have a conversation with Topps and try to understand how they believe this is anything other than an illegal lottery. I would love to have that conversation with them.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that this came up. Obviously, they have their terms and conditions, but this is something that I completely forgot about until this conversation. And it's worth unpacking because this was only a couple years ago. And Topps, again, was doing a direct buyback for a modern product and paying people out tens of thousands of dollars. It's pretty mind-boggling.
Yep.
Anyway, I don't want to veer us off track anymore. We're going to transition over to our next segment, which is stories move systems. So I want to shift from systems to people. Why do lawsuits and reform almost always require stories, not just statistics?
Stories resonate. I think stories allow people to understand that the people who have kind of had these harms aren't as different from them as they might think. I think that's a huge part of it. I think I could read a statistic, or you could read a statistic, say, well, yeah, well, that's them. That's not me. But when you see people, who look like you and sound like you, you realize that it could happen to you, or that these people aren't just evil and they didn't just lack willpower and self-control, that these are three-dimensional people with three-dimensional stories, and that they're worthy of helping and preventing future harm.
Right.
And I think that, at least in the casino space, that's what I've seen. I mean, when, early on, before I had a number of different types of cases with a number of different types of plaintiffs, it was very easy to demonize my clients and just say, well, that person went to prison because they're this, and this person did that. When I started having a more diverse number of clients and stories where there was, all different types of people, I think it helped people to understand that, oh, wow, that could be me, or that could be someone I love. This isn't just someone who's, hanging out in a shady alley. These are real people who confronted real challenges.
Right. Yeah, I mean, inside Collectors MD meetings, we hear a lot of shame, right? People don't necessarily say, I'm addicted per se. They say, I'm bad with money, or I lack discipline, right? So how dangerous is that sort of mislabeling?
I think mislabeling is a terrible. Well, I shouldn't say. I mean, listen, I think in the context of a meeting, I think however it is that you get there. Whatever it takes. I think that's great. I think it takes an incredible amount of courage to do that. So, whatever you want to call it. I think the mislabeling of it by the industry, by the casino industry, is a major problem. The idea that if you're addicted, there's a problem with you, as opposed to this is an addictive product that's going to cause addiction in a lot of people. But that's not what the model is. The model is, if you're a problem gambler, this is what you do, without any acknowledgement that this is an addictive product, and very normal, very intelligent people are going to make some really bad decisions because of the addiction. So many of my clients are incredibly intelligent people who now, outside of the addiction, recognize that what they were doing was incredibly dumb. But in the middle of the addiction, it makes sense, right? They just lost $20,000. So then you should probably go double or nothing, right? And then you lost again. So you should probably double or nothing. And all of that makes perfect sense when you're in the throes of the addiction. But when you're outside of it, you realize that those are bad choices. But the idea that only unintelligent or undisciplined people make these bad choices is complete nonsense. And I think that's a really important message to get out there.
Yeah, it is a really, really important message. The mislabeling itself, I think can be incredibly dangerous because it keeps the focus on somebody's character instead of the context, right? It's so easy to lose control when you're in an environment designed to cause you to lose control, right? When someone says something like, I'm bad with money, or I lack discipline, they internalize the problem as a personal failure rather than recognizing the environment they were operating in. And that shame shuts down the curiosity. It delays help seeking. It makes people more likely to hide what's happening instead of actually addressing it. And from, I think, a legal and behavioral standpoint, that framing also lets harmful systems off the hook, right? If the story is I'm weak, then the system never has to change. But when you name what's actually happening, the engineered urgency, the chance-based rewards, the loss-chasing mechanics, it becomes crystal clear that many people are just responding to predictably to or responding predictably to environments designed to push behavior. The longer somebody's believes this is some sort of moral flaw rather than a behavioral response, the more likely they are to repeat the cycle. Shame doesn't correct the behavior, it reinforces it. Accurate language is often the first step toward recovery because it replaces self-blame with understanding that opens the door to real support.
And I have this conversation or a similar conversation with almost all of my clients, because when clients call me, they are ashamed. That is a big part of it. And the way I tell them what my philosophy is, which is you would not be in this position if you did not make bad decisions. No question about that. I have never absolved someone or attempted to absolve, an addicted gambler of all blame. But the problem is right now, the way that the courts and the way that I think most of society looks at it is that the gambler is 100% responsible and the casino is 0% responsible. And that sure as hell isn't true either. Right. I have not met a single addicted gambler who did not get there without the prodding and manipulation of a VIP program and a VIP host. There's shared blame on both sides. And right now the addicted individual is bearing 100% of that, and that's not correct and it's not fair.
Yeah. And do you think that shame and secrecy actually protect harmful systems by keeping people silent?
100% it does, especially with this addiction, because as you alluded to earlier, it's not like an addiction to alcohol or drugs where there are physical manifestations that other people can identify. You can hide this addiction so well. So that shame is a really big part of it, and it does, perversely protect the systems in place to manipulate the addiction in the first place.
Yeah. I do want to say how proud I am of folks in our community that have the courage, have taken the leap to join one of our peer support meetings, to get involved with what we're doing, to take advantage of our free tools, resources, education, all of it, so that they can live healthier lives, right? The hobby ends up consuming people. It ends up becoming a huge part of their livelihoods. And when it takes over in an unhealthy way, that can pose major problems, not just for the person, but for the people around that person. And so again, it takes a lot of courage to come forward and admit that you have a problem or admit that things have started to become a little bit unhealthy. And so taking that step, getting into the actual meeting, like you said before, is monumental. And we always say, even in traditional gambling recovery, that making that step, getting your, butt in one of those seats, it's the biggest step. It's the hardest step. But once you do that, that opens the door for just the framework, the foundation of a better life. And that's what we are trying to help people do. And, on the flip side of that, the more people that come forward and admit or say out loud that they've developed an unhealthy relationship with a harmful behavior, whether it be traditional gambling or collecting, that also creates, more pressure to these systems to start making change, right? I don't want to suggest that you become a data point per se, but we really do need to put together data and case studies and real research so that we have tangible evidence to support that there are real issues at play here, right?
Yeah, and one of the frustrating things is that data does exist and is being collected and used by the companies. The only person who can't see them is the person who needs to see it, right? It's the person who, it's the individual who has a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The people sitting on all of that data are the platforms that are, part of the problem. And it's all proprietary data, so they're not going to turn that over to anybody. So we need to create our, our own data and figure out like, what's really, really going on behind the scenes here. Ideally, in a perfect world, some of these platforms start to, make real changes. We could potentially partner with them in some capacity so that we could layer in support and leverage that data to help create a healthier ecosystem. But that's going to take a lot of effort and approvals and conversations, and there's an uphill battle there. And there's this sense of urgency that we can't wait for that to happen. We want to help as many people as we can right now, which is why we're so gung-ho about just getting everything out there. We're not going to sit around and wait for the powers that be to endorse this message. So with that, we're going to transition over to our final segment, which is prevention over cleanup. So I know you've shifted a lot of your focus from, cleaning up harm to preventing it. So what does early intervention actually look like before damage compounds?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go back to, I know we kind of shifted to the next segment, but at the end of the last segment, when you were talking about integrating Collectors MD into some of these breaking platforms, I think that is in big part what it looks like through the normalization of this conversation. Like, so prevention to me looks like normalizing, destigmatizing and normalizing the conversation about addiction around these things, not just for people who are in serious trouble or think that they might have a problem, but from the start. Like, let's have a conversation about what addiction might look like before you start, before you start spending all kinds of money. I think that's what it looks like in the casino space. I think that's what it looks like in breaking and ripping too, is having an intelligent conversation as opposed to, trying to force casinos to admit that their product is addictive.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's really what it is, you've said it several times today, and I think I have too. I'm not trying for the breaking industry down. I just want to have a real conversation about how to prevent. And I think I really think that's what it comes down to is just destigmatizing and normalizing the conversation around this.
Yeah. Yeah. Really well said. So, the next segment again, do you want me to ask that question again?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Cause you kind of, and I didn't give you the opportunity to sort of, provide feedback on everything I just said to close out the last segment. So I want to make sure that we answer all these questions. So, I said, what does early intervention actually look like before damage compounds?
Yeah. So early intervention looks like helping people before they're drowning. It looks like education and conversations around addiction before addiction happens. I think that's what it looks like.
Yeah, well said. And if we bring that into collecting, what would meaningful prevention look like without killing the fun or the growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's about collecting within your budget. I think that's really what it's about. If you have the money to spend a lot on breaking or ripping, and that's your form of entertainment, God bless. That's great. Have at it. No judgments here. But the problem is when people are doing it, in above their means, and it's outside of their budget. But that's really what I think it comes down to is helping people establish a budget and stick to the budget, irrespective of what new product might be coming out that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I say this a lot, but guardrails aren't anti-hobby. They're anti-harm, right? Would you agree that sustainability requires trust, not constant escalation?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It does require trust, and it's frustrating that unfortunately it's only our side, I think, that sees that or agrees with that. But yeah, I think I think there's so much room for people like you and me to work with people like, all the companies we've mentioned, both casinos and sports cards, but those conversations, unfortunately, are few and far between.
Yeah. All right, Matt, we're going to shift over to the rapid fire reflection round. I'm going to ask you a question. You're going to hit me with the first thing that comes to mind. You ready?
I think so.
Okay. There are 8 of them. So
Right.
take your time, but again, short, sweet answers. All right. So from a legal standpoint, what hobby behavior today feels closest to a casino mechanic?
Advertising.
What's the most misunderstood phrase in gambling law or responsible play messaging?
If you or someone has a problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
One thing casinos understand about human behavior that the hobby is accidentally copying.
I don't know how accidental it is, but impulse control.
The biggest myth collectors believe about control or skill.
Oh man, that's a tough one. I guess it's the ability to predict the market in the middle and long term.
Yeah. At what point does fun legally and ethically start to look like exploitation?
I think when people are manipulated to gamble above their budget and above their needs.
One early warning sign, behavioral, not financial, that someone might be crossing a line.
Yeah, I think constantly staring at the phone is one, and mood swings up and down without any apparent reason why.
If the hobby adapted just one safeguard tomorrow, what would you want it to be?
Income verification.
And lastly, finish this sentence. The law usually steps in too late because
there's too much goddamn money at stake.
Well said. Matt, seriously, thank you. This was an incredibly important conversation. What we're really talking about here isn't cards or casinos. It's how modern systems are built to accelerate impulse faster than awareness can catch up. If anything in this conversation resonated, if collecting, gambling, or any form of entertainment started feeling heavier than it should, you're not alone. Collectors MD exists to give people language, awareness, and support before things spiral. We host free weekly peer support meetings every Wednesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern and a Thursday meeting from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern in partnership with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado called Unboxed, powered by Collectors MD. You can find everything we do at collectorsmd.com. Be sure to subscribe to the Collectors Compass on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all major streaming platforms, as well as Behind the Breaks and Collectors MD features. I'm Alyx Efron. This is the Collector's Compass, reminding you to collect with intention, not compulsion. We'll see you next time.